All right, so it's our first show. We ready?
We better be. We're about to go on.
So, Strategic Maine, what are we doing?
We are going to be talking about the Maine economy and public policy with two terrific guests today, Ernie LaBelle.
Well, we also have MIT joining us.
And we have Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds from MIT.
Well, I'm Joel.
I'm Joe.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back with Strategic Maine.
Is brought to you in part by the Puffin Boat Company, building boats with a purpose. And by the Maine Credit Union. Maine's credit unions, providing 170 plus branches in Maine and serving over 680,000 members statewide. We are committed to putting money to work locally because that's where they believe it works best. MaineCreditUnions.org. Maine's credit unions, mobile-friendly and member-owned.
Welcome back to Strategic Maine. I'm your host, Joel Allenbaugh. My co-host, Joe Edwards. Joining us today, Ernie LaBelle. So, Strategic Maine, sponsored by Alliance for Maine. All three board members sitting here at the table. So, let's tell people a little bit about what Alliance for Maine is and maybe the best way to start, Joe. What draws you to this effort?
Well, I mean, I came to Maine in 1987, so I've been here almost just over 30 years now.
You want to pause there and apologize?
Yeah, no. Sorry to Maine, but great decision for me. I mean, I love the state and raised my family here. But I've been involved with on the periphery of Maine politics, but with employers and employees throughout those 30 years, and I've been frustrated with sort of the struggles of the Maine economy and the fact that it seemed to me that we were not as prosperous as we might be, and certainly not as prosperous as other states. So a few years ago, we raised some money and commissioned a study, very objective, just to look at statistics in Maine. And we found out, surprisingly, that in Maine today, deaths exceed births, which is almost unheard of. Our children are leaving because they can't find quality jobs. And we have outliers, high-cost outliers in taxes, energy, and healthcare, combined with the fact that we're not getting anywhere near our share of venture capital investment. So, not surprisingly, you end up, and we've lost 20,000 manufacturing jobs in the last decade or so. So we've got a very unfortunate and negative economic information that impacts the future for every family. And I've watched as public policy sort of continues to deal with these relatively small issues, and it occurred to me and others that Maine needs a strategy. We don't have a plan for how we really grow the economy and create jobs. We keep doing sort of little short-term things, but if you're going to get to a successful final outcome, there are a lot of things that need to happen along the way. And there's nobody really looking at that, partly because people don't understand it. And people don't understand the need for investment, the importance of foundational jobs, the relative significance of investing and in connecting to the 21st century economy. I mean, farming, fishing, forestry have been foundational here in Maine for a long time, but they're on the decline. We've got to match our workforce and our educational system to the needs of the economy going forward. And those are complicated issues. I mean, you've got to train people up to be ready for 21st century jobs, but you've got to have the jobs ready and waiting for them when they get there. And we don't have a plan. I mean, I don't think anybody is talking about a strategic plan for the state.
So it seems like we're propping up what we've got going on. I mean, we spend a lot of our time, energy, and money sort of, I think of the amount of the population that doesn't have a job and needs help, rather than maybe looking at how do we get them into the job force, and how do we create a job force that can accept
that's
them.
Potentially a negative feedback loop. The more you do with that, the more difficult you may make it to create jobs. But the bottom line for me with AFM, and I was building to that conclusion, is that we need a strategy, and to get to the strategy, I think we need people to understand why we need it, that we need it, and the elements that go into it. So AFM is designed to try to educate people about that.
Well, I'm a lot different than Joe in a lot of ways, but primarily is I'm a Maine native. I was born here and raised here.
You're not from away.
I'm not from away. And I've grown up here in northern Maine. I've lived in central Maine and southern Maine. And I think I've worked in every Maine industry, from the lumber industry, the potato industry, the textile industry. So I understand, I think, how work occupations and other opportunities exist in Maine or don't exist in Maine. And we've lost, as Joe said, a lot of our primary jobs, foundational jobs, over the years, and we've replaced them with jobs that may be in nonprofit segments or some other ways of people earning a living who want to stay here. But it's time that we have a strategy that helps us to understand where the jobs in Maine are going to be, how they're going to help Maine people, and how we're going to get Maine people ready for those jobs when they happen. Right now, if you look at many occupations, there just aren't people to fill those jobs. There are help wanted signs all over the place. There are nursing homes who are considering closing because they don't have CNAs. There's all kinds of truck driver opportunities available, and there just aren't people being trained for jobs that we want in Maine, industrial jobs and jobs that pay well and provide a future for people.
I'll certainly share what brings me to this effort, but just really quickly, if I loop back to Joe for just a second. So you said foundational jobs, and then Ernie said, jobs in nonprofit. What's wrong with every person in the state working for a nonprofit?
Well, I view it as a pyramid. Basically, there's a structure of job hierarchy, and all jobs are important, all jobs are useful, they all have a role, but foundational jobs are the jobs that pay for everything. If you think about it for a second, I mean, the public sector jobs are at the top of the pyramid. If everybody worked for the government, teachers, fire, police, you'd have to tax them 100% to pay them. There isn't wealth being generated there to pay those salaries. That comes from the private sector. So the public sector is dependent on the private sector. Within the private sector, there's also a difference. Service jobs, same thing to somewhat lesser degree. If everybody was a lawyer and accountant, we still couldn't, we'd starve to death, we'd freeze. I mean, you wouldn't have any clothes.
We wouldn't get sued, though.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't, yeah, you might, well, yeah, your accounting would be accurate, but you wouldn't be able to eat or sleep or, have a house. Those are the things that build wealth. Manufacturing, construction, transportation, tourism. I mean, things that improve Maine's balance of payments. Things that we do that people out of state buy. Tourists that come here to Maine bring money into the state. Those are the things that create wealth and pay for everything else. So you've got to focus on those foundational jobs when you're looking to drive an economy or pay for more services or more public sector, more government spending. It starts with foundational jobs.
And from my perspective, so I come at this, I've been in the insurance industry, and more specifically the health insurance industry, for the past 20 plus years. And so my clients are employers, and the ripple sort of effect of that is their employees. And I've watched this dynamic of them just trying to keep businesses afloat, dealing with probably one of the most difficult line items that they deal with, sure. which is mind-numbingly challenging. I've seen some succeed, I've seen some fail, I've seen every one of them figure out how to survive, spending more, getting less, and trying to sort of deal with that amongst the other pressures. And in that role, I have had the opportunity to get more involved on the policy side, so spend time with the legislature, and for anyone who hasn't done that, it's a great learning experience. You may sense my sarcasm, but you watch that process, and you can't help but come away going, the decisions that are made, and this isn't a criticism of legislators, it's a criticism of the process, are so isolated. They're not big picture. It's one small decision at a time without necessarily understanding the ramifications of how that ties into the big.
All the players are in an isolated situation. And what happens is one does what they think is the right thing to do in order to be good for the industry, like the insurance industry, while the other is concerned about how the employee is going to pay more as part of their health insurance. So the pay rates may go up, but the cost of health insurance goes up with it. And so it's a lose-lose for the poor employee who's trying to earn a living. So development of a strategic plan that says, here's how we're going to deal with those things, and every party is involved in that process, would help everybody understand the impact of what we do and what we don't do.
How much of that do you think is in our control here? I mean, when you talk about healthcare, I mean, I immediately go to federal regulatory parameters and some things we can do in states, some things that sort of affect us. How do we focus? What are the things we can do in state?
Well, those things are, health insurance is probably too complicated to answer in one sitting. But I think what we do in state is we collect the parties together, those that employ people, those that train people, those that create legislation and providers of different kinds. And we try to understand where we're going with our processes and what do we need to do to get ready for that. And if we could do that, and we could go outside of the state and then convince businesses to come to Maine because we have this all figured out, I think we'd be a lot more inviting to people than what they read about us as being a bad place to do business, a difficult environment to work in. And they say, no, let's not go there. Let's go to New Hampshire or let's go to California instead.
But can't we just throw them the good things, like it snows 8 months out of the year? And I mean, can't we?
Sure.
Can't we put the positive attributes out there?
Absolutely. I think there are lots of people who would want to come here if it snowed 8 months out of the year. But it doesn't snow 8 months of the year, and there's no control over the climate. But it's still a wonderful place to live for those of us who choose to, and it's a great place to visit because we know that to be the fact with the tourism. So it's a good place to be, and a lot of people want to stay here, but there isn't the opportunity to participate in the jobs that they used to do in paper mills and those environments where they were good jobs with great futures and retirement plans. So that's where we need to get back to, I think.
I know we're going to bring in another guest in a little bit, but how do we accomplish this? And what do you think is, I think more importantly, maybe not the role of the people sitting here at this table, but the role of the people that are watching?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, what you want is an educated voter population that supports public policy that makes sense. And I mean, the reason I got involved in AFM, the educational aspect, sort of has two components. One is time, and the other is complexity. And I think, we've had a series of referenda and other issues, public policy issues, where basically the question gets put to people, should we help folks in need? Should we help people who need help? Mainers are going to answer that question, yes, 99 times out of 100, and hooray for them and good for us, and that's exactly the kind of sentiment you want among people. But the question is, are we helping them short term? Are we helping them long term? Are we helping them effectively? Or are we helping them doing what appears to help them, but in the long run doesn't really accomplish the goal that we want? And the legislature in public policy often looks at a problem, puts a solution in place, and then walks away and says, hey, we've solved the problem, we've helped, unaware that down the road, and because of a lot more complexity and a lot of passage of time, the consequences are very different and not necessarily what they wanted. And I think, my frustration with public policy is people in general on these issues often don't understand the complexity. The vision is short-term and self-interested. Here's a problem, let's solve it. Let's do a short-term solution. Let's solve it with, throw money at it or put a program in place and fix it today. When in fact, but the problem goes on, or it makes things worse, or other people have the same problem down the road, because systemically, what we really need is to grow the economy and create jobs, put people to work, generate wealth, and expand the tax base to produce more tax money to help people. We need a vision that's longer in time and more complicated. And so I think AFM is going to take on the role of trying to explain that to people, and hopefully that starts to swing public policy in a more constructive direction.
Well, and let's hope that we can succeed at just that, because, as someone with young kids in this state, I'd kind of like to see them stick around.
Yeah.
Stick around, folks. Coming next is Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds from MIT to talk a little bit more about what Maine can do from an innovation standpoint to make sure that we can actually accomplish a strategic plan that gets us to the end result.
Economies are built on foundational sectors that make and do things: manufacturing, construction, transportation, and energy are some examples. Service and public sector jobs are important, but dependent upon the foundational sectors. If everyone worked for the government, they'd have to be taxed at 100% to pay themselves. All of the lawyers, accountants, teachers, financial advisors, insurance brokers, journalists, lobbyists, and legislators in the world wouldn't create one penny of wealth. Actually improve living conditions or provide food, clothing, and shelter. Jobs in foundational sectors pay for the service and public sectors. They create wealth, generate the capital necessary to improve operations and create jobs, and make it possible to provide police and fire protection, quality schools, and good government. Those jobs are dying in Maine, and there's no long-term strategy to maintain them or replace them. We need a plan.
Welcome back to Strategic Maine. We are delighted in this segment to have as our guest Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds. She's the Executive Director of the Industrial Performance Center at MIT and also a lecturer at MIT in the Department of Urban Studies. She also has a lifetime connection to Maine. And Doctor, maybe we should start there.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, in fact, my family's been deeply connected to Maine since the founding of the state. I consider this a home for me. I grew up in New Hampshire, I work in Massachusetts, but really my heart is in Maine, and I'm really a big fan of supporting the New England economy in general.
Well, but MIT, I mean, magic letters, routinely rated the #1 research university in the world, science, technology, engineering, math, innovation, brilliance, genius sometimes. I'm sure everybody's interested in what you do at MIT and what's going on at MIT.
Well, first of all, I am the Executive Director of the Industrial Performance Center, which is a center that's been around for about 25 years, that's trying to understand how firms, industries, and technologies emerge and grow in the global economy. And so, whereas perhaps 30 plus years ago we cared a lot about productivity and we were very concerned about issues of productivity in this country, we've slowly but surely started to really focus on innovation and how do we become more innovative within our universities, within our cities, within our states and countries. And so MIT, as you know, has been really an engine of innovation since its inception. It was founded to be a very applied institution and has continued the Menos and Manus theme, which is both mind and hands, to try and solve some of the world's greatest problems. Today, MIT is working across a whole host of critical issues for not only the country but for the world. Clean energy and how we are going to address some of our key challenges in developing renewable energy. Water and concerns about how we support water and have clean water for the world. Healthcare and what we do with all this data. We have a tremendous amount of big data and capabilities in artificial intelligence and doing things with data, and so understanding how we are going to use that data and improve our understanding of genomics, et cetera, for the healthcare industry. Robotics and advanced manufacturing, sensors, how we are going to create new ways of production that are going to make how we go from a prototype to commercial production a much faster and more efficient process. We have a lot of different opportunities that touch almost every industry that you and I know and interact with.
The university itself is a research engine. I mean, it's, you know, again, it identified as maybe the #1 innovative research institution in the world, but there must be spin-offs in the commercialization of that research. And
absolutely, and MIT also ranks #1, one of the top universities in the world for that kind of commercialization. And I think that historically that's just happened sort of naturally, if you will, kind of without a lot of curation. You can think of a lot of companies that have come out of MIT over time, Bose, Raytheon, et cetera, that really have been major contributors to our economy in this country. But now we see a real active effort to try and create an ecosystem that's really geared up to support faculty and students in creating new innovations and breakthrough technologies. So it's not just what happens inside the institute, but also what happens outside. What are we doing to support these companies once they leave the walls of MIT and start to grow outside of MIT? So there's a tremendous amount of what we might call kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem in and around MIT to try and make that engine work as well as it can.
now, do you work personally with entrepreneurs and people who are trying to commercialize MIT research product?
I don't work actually directly with the entrepreneurs. There's a lot of other centers that do. Our center is really focused on how do we support innovation more broadly? What is the environment and the ecosystem that helps drive innovation? And we should step back for a moment and say, why do we care so much about innovation? And the point is that innovation defined broadly. So whether it's product innovation, process innovation, new organizational models, business models. It's innovation that doesn't happen necessarily in a lab in a white coat by a scientist. But innovation broadly is about driving knowledge creation. It's about doing things in a different way than we've done before. And so we want to ask ourselves, well, how do we support that? How do we, help individuals and companies and regions think about innovation? And so we think about this in terms of both within firms, but also external to firms. So what's the environment in which firms are able to grow and innovate? How are we supporting them both through a policy perspective, but also through key inputs like talent and like materials and new technologies, et cetera. So how do we organize that as a society to support as much innovation as we can?
So you may have heard this show's called Strategic Maine. And so what we're interested in is the long-term strategic possibility of revitalizing the Maine economy by connecting to some of these kinds of activities. It sounds like that would be almost right up your alley in terms of the research network structure environment that you just discussed.
Well, I think that that's exactly what is the opportunity for Maine, is this kind of connection to these larger networks. Maine has had a tough decade plus recently, and a lot of trends in the economy that haven't been going in quite the right direction. And I think that the way to turn that around is to focus on where the opportunities lie for the state and build some of the key inputs for driving innovation in a regional economy like Maine. Maine is connected to this engine in Massachusetts, by proximity, that is the envy of the world. I mean, the Massachusetts economy and the innovation going on in that region is second to none. And so the question is, well, how do we build the environment and the talent and the connections in Maine that can help build upon and benefit from that proximity?
So, well, to that point, I mean, I just read the 2016 study of the Massachusetts economy. There was just under $6 billion of venture capital invested in Massachusetts in 2016. There was a Maine Biz article earlier this year that said there was $3 million invested in Maine in the fourth quarter of 2016 and none in the first quarter of 2017. So how do we, I mean, that seems to me to be a measure of the judgment about the environment and the desirability of investing and coming to Maine. How do we turn that around?
Well, as I said, I think there's fundamentals that have to be addressed in the state. And there's no question that today, what drives innovation, what drives investment is talent. So no longer, I think, are companies going wherever they can go for low cost. Low cost really isn't where we compete in the United States. We compete on innovation, we compete on talent. And so the first and foremost is the question about how's Maine's population look relative to educated workforce, an entrepreneurial spirit and supporting the entrepreneurs, investment in people and in their ideas. So I think that's a first point, is to say talent and an educated workforce is first and foremost the most important piece for developing Maine's economy. Building on some of the opportunities Maine has, a number of different industries have been identified as opportunities for Maine, agriculture, life sciences, for example. So how do we find ways to build on those opportunities, connect them to the larger regional economy, and support entrepreneurial efforts? Now, entrepreneurial efforts can be by individuals, but let's remember also they can be by firms, small and medium-sized firms, larger firms. What we're looking for, what we see a lot of now in terms of how innovation occurs, is a lot of collaboration across different entities within society. So it's not just the private sector necessarily moving forward, though you need the private sector, but it could be a public-private effort. It could be nonprofits that participate as well. What we know is that there's a collaboration needed, and that a lot of these innovations that come to the fore, new companies, et cetera, are a combination of efforts where people identify opportunities and then look for resources and building teams that can help drive that new enterprise.
We're almost out of time. I'm going to ask you one more question and look for a quick answer.
Sorry.
Believe me, these have been incredibly valuable minutes. Time. What kind of time frame should Maine be looking at strategically to accomplish these kinds of changes?
Well, I think that we have to understand that there needs to be a sense of urgency about what's going on, because the pace of change is such that places that get on the wagon, if you will, in terms of understanding how to build on their competitive advantages and address costs.
So we need to move quickly. How far out do we need to plan?
I think we need to look at 10 years.
10
You
years.
have to look at a 10-year plan. You have to be thinking about how you're going to be turning around some major challenges.
Education, workforce, capital investment, cost,
The cost environment.
network, cooperation, all of it.
All of it has to be happening now to pay off in 10 years.
Thank you. We're going to have to close this segment, and I'm
Okay.
sorry. We are going to try very hard to get you back again. But this has been Dr. Liz Reynolds from MIT, and you've been watching Strategic Maine.
Maine needs a plan to strengthen our economy, now and for the future. Today, our economy is one of the smallest and slowest growing in the nation. That's because our workforce is shrinking. We're losing our good paying jobs, and our living expenses are higher than average. To address these challenges, we must first understand how they threaten our economic health. Maine's population and our workforce are shrinking. For years, our rate of births has been falling, but now we have more deaths than births in Maine. Also, there are more people moving out of Maine than moving in. Maine's workforce is the oldest in the nation, and tens of thousands of our current workers are retiring. By 2024, our working age population will drop by 64,000, and our retirees will increase by 79,000. Maine's economy has another challenge. We've lost goods-producing jobs, like manufacturing, and replaced them with lower-paying service jobs, like retail and fast food. In the past 15 years, we've lost 20,000 production jobs, while virtually all of our job growth has been in the service sector. But not all jobs are created equal. On average, production jobs pay 19% more than service jobs. Losing better paying jobs hurts because average wages in Maine are already 20% below the national average, 45th lowest in the US. Lower wages might be okay if it costs less to live in Maine, but it doesn't. Our cost of living is 11% higher than average. We pay 12% more for energy and 25% more for health care. We also pay more in taxes to support higher than average state government spending. We spend 13% more of our personal incomes on education compared to the national average. Maine's economy is one of the smallest, even among states with similar populations. Our economic output per worker ranks 49th in the nation. Weak economic performance prevents us from attracting investments that could help our companies start and expand. In fact, Maine receives just a fraction of the private investment it should, based on our size. It also explains why Maine has become less self-sufficient, relying on federal government spending to support 30% of our economy. A shrinking workforce, loss of good-paying jobs, declining wages, higher taxes, and higher cost of living is a formula for economic decline. So, how do we put Maine on a path to economic growth and prosperity? We start with a plan. Visit theallianceformaine.org to learn more and join us in working for a stronger economic future.
Welcome back to Strategic Maine. Well, you've met the board for the Alliance for Maine. You've heard a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish on Strategic Maine. We want to make this state a better place for all of us to live, to raise our kids. We've had some great guests. Thanks to Dr. Reynolds for joining us from MIT. And next week, you're definitely going to want to tune in because we have two Maine CEOs. We have Mark Bancroft, President and CEO of Bancroft Contracting, and Jack Parker, President and CEO of Reed & Reed. You're not going to want to miss it. Join us next time on Strategic Maine.
Is brought to you in part by the Puffin Boat Company, building boats with a purpose. And by the Maine Credit Union. Maine's credit unions, providing 170-plus branches in Maine and serving over 680,000 members statewide. We are committed to putting money to work locally because that's where they believe it works best. MaineCreditUnions.org. Maine's Credit Unions, mobile-friendly and member-owned.